Hello, today I'm talking with Professor Simon Marginson of the Centre for the Study of Higher Education at the University of Melbourne. Simon, first, can I ask you about education in Australia? Education from early childhood to university is now bigger in policy terms and in terms of public involvement and interest than probably it ever has been before. Would you be able to summarise for me what you think is working well and what you think needs fixing?
There's a number of ways we can look at that. Let's take the sectors. I'd say early childhood is a weak spot. We have very low participation rates, we have low expenditures on it, we have low esteem for the teachers who teach it, and yet it might be the most formative and important part of education. After that, basic primary education is relatively well handled if you look at it comparatively. Secondary education in Australia was of higher quality than people realised, I think. It's now beginning to be outstripped by many other systems, and a key problem there is that we stream people between those who attend expensive independent private schools, those who attend Catholic schools and those who attend government schools, and we've lowered the esteem that we give to government schools. It's become difficult for middle class parents to keep their children in government schools till the end of secondary education, and there are low expectations about academic achievement in many government schools as a result. So we're allowing our upper secondary population to be stratified too much. There's too much dropout. Not enough students are doing well academically, and compared to our comparator countries, we're perhaps underachieving now at upper secondary. Universities, we have good teaching and research universities. We have a large spread of them, one of the best distributions of such universities in the world. We have a strong all-round system, similar to Canada and the Netherlands and perhaps the UK, and stronger than most other countries. What we lack are very, very good universities at the top, the kind of places which are stellar concentrations of research expertise and attract attention from populations, students, academic staff, industry, government from around the world. We need stronger top-level universities, but we have good second-level universities and they're well distributed across the country. So that's looking at it in terms of sectors. I'd say looking at it in terms of the learning process itself and not worrying quite so much about the comparative dimension. Perhaps we don't achieve well enough in the lower socioeconomic status echelons. There are societies which educate their poorer families much better than we do, although we're a fairly inclusive country in a lot of other ways, providing for rights and social and economic support. But in education, our lowest quartile does not achieve very well, and there is stronger achievement in Canada and there's stronger achievement in much of Europe and even in parts of Asia as well. At the very top, perhaps our best students are not being pushed hard enough, not as intellectually excited enough. I think that's true of universities in particular, and perhaps they have to go elsewhere for the sort of at postgraduate stage too often for the very high level of stimulation that some of them need. But I think that we are inclusive. We provide good citizenship education on the whole. We are fairly generous in terms of our attitude to minorities. We have good approaches to gender and education, very forthright commitment to the rights of women and the enhancement of women's achievement. That's been a great change in Australia in the last 30 years, and that's been a very successful change. And on the whole, our education system is much less racist than the society, and the society is less racist than most of the other English-speaking countries. So we do well to be culturally inclusive, although education at the top, in terms of its elite behaviour, like most Australian institutions, is still dominated by the older Anglo-Australian core.
Do you reckon that the Australian education system now is producing a more egalitarian society than was the case previously?
It's very difficult to answer that without answering it empirically, and that's a complicated problem, and I don't have a ready answer to it, but I would say that you can't read the role of education in social equality or inequality without looking at patterns of social equality and inequality more largely, and considering how education is itself a product of social organisation as well as one of the contributing factors to it, one of the reproductive factors to a society. So I think we need to unpick that whole education-society relationship to answer that question, and we need to look at the trends to income inequality stratification of opportunity between different occupational groups and classes and so on more broadly. My gut instinct tells me that things are becoming more unequal in Australian society as they seem to be, on economic measures, to be becoming in many other societies. That's been one of the meta trends of this era. And yet there's counter trends too, and you can see that at the global level, for example, many new emerging countries are becoming modernised and becoming stronger economically and socially in this period. So, and I think in Australia too, that the incidence of really isolated and poor and weak regions is perhaps diminishing as more and more of those have been drawn into the modern development of Australia. So I suspect we probably are more inclusive as a society than we were, and that maybe has to be balanced against trends to measured income inequality, which seems to be growing. I mean, Gini coefficients are growing. What role education plays in that is, as I said, I think unclear and has to be answered empirically. But I think that the stratification of our school system, with more and more of the attention being focused on the minority and independent schools, with them growing and with the government schools beginning to lose social esteem and social support, is a real problem.
There's quite a lot of doom and gloom about the Australian higher education sector at the moment. Funding is being squeezed, and some recent high-profile reports argue that the university system has to change radically in order to meet new challenges. Would you agree with that assessment? And if so, what can Australian universities do about it?
Well, I think the gradual withdrawal of per-student government funding, I mean, it's by no means disappeared, it's still substantial, but it's less than it was as a proportion of total funding, and there's every sign it will continue to diminish. I think that's a serious issue. We can partly compensate for that by charging students more and running their entry through an income contingent tuition loan repayment scheme called the HEX. That seems to soften the blow of increased tuition, makes it less likely that it'll discriminate against poorer students. And that mechanism has worked fairly well for the Australian government as a way of reducing direct government expenditure and increasing student contributions without a big cost to equity. I don't know whether we can keep doing that. And I'm worried about the withdrawal of government funding because it seems to be some sort of lowering of expectations about the social and collective role of universities and their contribution to society, which I think should be foremost in the way they operate. I mean, they should be thinking very seriously about how they are contributing to the general good and not just to the individual students who are in them in a particular time. And I think if we require students to pay for most of the cost of education, what we do is we say, okay, this is basically about individual advantage, and that students will rightly say, well, our courses should be tailored to our vocational needs and not much more, and we don't consider that our courses should be used, or the university as an institution should be used to further a broad range of social objectives aside from our future careers and vocational interests. I think that would be a narrowing of the university, unacceptable narrowing in terms of its role in contributing to a civilised society overall. So I think that, the public and the private contributions are getting out of balance in the sense that we've maintained a balance between higher education as an individual good and higher education as a collective good. But I think we're losing the collective side of that balance, and I think it's got unknown consequences, but it's worrying. It may be particularly worrying for liberal programs that provide general education of a formative kind at a high level and prepare high quality citizens able to do a broad range of things.
In your recent public lecture at Flinders University, you argued that higher education in several East Asian countries is developing at an exponential pace. And this is especially true in the natural sciences. How do you see this as influencing the global distribution of knowledge generation in years to come?
Well, I think it's all changing at the global level as it's changing in many countries. And one of the big changes in the university sector has been in the last 5 years, and perhaps over the last 15, has been the rise of East Asian university and research systems on the scale of Western Europe, and producing potentially as much science as North America or more in the longer term. I mean, China, Korea, Taiwan, China, Hong Kong, SAR, and of course Japan has always been a major player, and Singapore. And those, when you aggregate those countries, not that they are a single block or a region in the sense that Western Europe has become, that's a lot of firepower, and they have a certain amount in common culturally, strong states, strong education ethos in the home, and a desire to catch up to the West through modernisation and science. And that's powering this tremendous rate of development at a rapid pace, and I have to say through very intelligent winners picking and other strategic approaches by government, which we've tended to put aside and say don't work or shouldn't be allowed to interfere with individual freedoms in the market. So there's successful interventions by states is the hallmark of this great growth of the knowledge economy in Asia. Now what that means is that in the sciences, which are global sciences, English language sciences, and still in many ways American university sciences, the East Asian countries will become major players. They already are in many fields. The Japanese in physics and mathematics have been important for a while. China is becoming very important in engineering and related areas that relate to construction and infrastructure and urbanisation, and will no doubt move more into the life sciences in future as well. So you'd expect a lot of our knowledge to come from those environments, but increasingly you would think too that as East Asia becomes more global in its impact, especially through economic growth, that it will start to inject more cultural and political power into the global environment, and China in particular will start to affect the way we think about a lot of things, not just in relation to science and its applications and industry, but also in relation to social organisation and human ethics. So I think we're on the brink of a more plural world where a much larger set of ideas are going to be mainstreamed, as distinct from the domination of ideas coming out of the English language countries in Western Europe, which we've seen really since the Industrial Revolution.
Finally, Flinders is a small university in a relatively small city. Do you think it has an independent future?
I think that small countries and small universities, or medium-sized ones, which I think Flinders is by on the world scale, have plenty of options and strong futures if their conditions are right and their strategies are good. Conditions do have to be relatively favourable for a small to medium-sized player, because they can't use size advantages alone, regardless of the conditions, to drive development and success. A country like France is always going to be a major player. A place like Hong Kong or Singapore has to be very intelligent and has to work very hard, and I think it's the same for universities. The factor that bolsters universities, of course, is prestige. So that in Australia, the oldest university in each capital city, which has held the allegiance of the middle-class citizens for generations, is always in the box seat. And the others, the more modern universities, the post-1960 ones, or in the case of Monash University in Victoria, post-58, are always pushing against the barrier created by the dominance of the traditional players. And Flinders' problem has always been that University of Adelaide is really hegemonic in terms of its capacity to command middle-class allegiance and support. It's also right in the middle of the city and has a nice sandstone precinct, which helps consolidate that traditional prestige-building role. So that's where the status is in the university system, and that's where students have gone for occupational status. Flinders has always had good programs and high-quality academics, and often innovative in ways that Adelaide has not been. But it's still a struggle. It's not just a question of the merit of the teaching and even the research. It's also a question of institutional prestige. So Flinders has always had to work against that. But on the other hand, you look around the world and there are places like Warwick in the UK or Stanford in its time in the US, which is really a product just of the 20th century, not before, like the older Ivy Leagues. There are cases where such places have come from nowhere and become major influences in the higher education world. Hong Kong University of Science and Technology is another. Usually you find that there was substantial philanthropic support, like at Stanford, or substantial government support, like at Hong Kong University. But then a place like Warwick, I think, has been able to be particularly astute in its strategy and has been able to use all of the resources and options available to it. So I think a very good institutional leadership with a careful eye for specialisation at a medium-sized university like Flinders with good academic capacity without it right now being outstanding, can over time lift the institution and improve it. But it is a matter of picking the right winners, of backing the right courses and research programs that are the ones that are likely to matter a lot in 5 or 10 years. Flinders has one great asset. It has a medical school based in a hospital, and that has been a mainstay of Flinders really for a long time. It provides significant resources and prestige for the institution, and because of that advantage, Flinders is better placed than some other universities of its era.
Simon, thank you very much.
A pleasure.